Cool. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. Today, we're doing a Shanghainese dish called a lion's head meatball, or Shizitou. That's pretty common in a lot of like Chinese comfort food, a lot of Shanghainese food, stuff like that. This particular dish is a dish that I've been eating since I was a little kid. It used to be one of my favorites because it is done in a dark soy sauce braising sauce, which means that you can eat it with a little bit of rice when you run out of meatballs. So it was one of those dishes where I very frequently did not get the last meatball, so I used to eat the scraps a lot. So one of my favorites. The original version that I'm replicating today comes from a restaurant in San Francisco called Dragon House. The version that we're doing today is going to be substituting spinach in place of bok choy. We're going to be using bok choy in place of spinach, excuse me. Which is mostly just out of the fact that bok choy is a little bit more pantry friendly, so it happens to be what I have in the pantry. Really, that's probably the main thing. But also, I like bok choy a lot more than I like spinach, and I do also very distinctly remember not liking the spinach part of this dish. So that's all going to come up pretty soon. We're going to get to all of that today. So if you have any questions, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about lion's head meatballs, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or at the very least fun to watch. Yeah, if you're looking for the recipe for these videos, everything that I cook on a stream, it has a recipe video that goes along with it. Those usually live over on my YouTube channel, so if you're watching on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel that you're already on. And those all live over in recipe form over on that channel. So if you're looking for something that moves a little bit slower and we kind of talk our way through some of the decision making that goes into that stuff, that all lives over on YouTube. So check that out. Zapfish, how's it going? Yeah, thanks for tuning in again. Good to see you all. Jthro, oh cool, yeah, this is on your watch list. That's awesome. I didn't know that people had watch lists on Reddit, but that's pretty cool. Yeah, it's always super fun to see people like tuning in over like in repeat. That's cool because we can talk about the things that I messed up yesterday too, stuff like that. Cool. So right off the bat, the first thing that you'll notice is that I'm actually mincing up twice as much garlic and ginger as I normally would. So right now we are chopping up for 8 cloves of garlic and also 2 inches of ginger, and that's because it goes in 2 different places in these meatballs. The first source is going to be in the meatballs themselves, and the second source is going to be in the braising sauce. So we're going to be using these in 2 different places, which means that we need to double quantity. And the reason for that is mostly because we're trying to build out different layers or different sources of umami, and the independence of flavor is that what we're really looking for. So I love adding it in 2 different places, but I have also gone back and forth on whether or not you actually need to add garlic and ginger to the meatballs. So I think you might even be able to leave it out of the meatballs if you run out of ginger or garlic. You'll probably be okay. What I think it is really, really essential is in the wok fry. So if it comes down to it and you only have enough for one side, I would say add it to the wok fry because that's going to be really, really important. Whereas the elements that go into the meatballs is kind of not nearly as important as that wok fry. So I'm starting off. This is 4 cloves of garlic 8 cloves of garlic and 2 inches of ginger. So we're setting aside the first 4 cloves. That's going to go into our wok fry, and then we're going to set aside the second batch of garlic. That's going to go straight into our meatballs. So let's go with garlic. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab my favorite meatball bowl. We're just going to toss all this stuff into one big bowl, and then we're just going to continue to add stuff to this bowl until we have our meatballs ready to go. So that's our ginger to start, or garlic, excuse me. Next up I'm moving on to my ginger. If your ginger is particularly old, or if you just don't like the chewy texture of the skin of ginger, I usually like peeling it with a spoon because it is not that difficult to get off. So you don't really need to use a potato peeler for this sort of stuff because ginger skin is so thin. So unlike if you were like doing a russet potato or something, just grab a spoon and it comes right off. And I found that the other great quality about peeling your ginger with a spoon is that it helps you get into like all of those really weird nooks and crannies of the ginger, like this, for example, where it kind of has like a weird like elbow joint in the ginger, because ginger grows in like really weird shapes. So the spoon really helps because that means that you can kind of like peel around those joints a little bit better. And that's our ginger. Alright, so for our ginger, we're going to do fine mince here. So I'm starting off by getting a dice going. So that's slices down the center, one down the middle, and then we're just going straight down for our dice. And then from there, the fine mince is just about running your knife through it. And I found that with minces, it's really just about persistence. Persistence is key. Also having a really, really sharp knife. When your knife is dull, it can be really annoying because you have to chop twice as much because the knife is dull. And that will do it. So I'm setting this aside with our other batch of garlic, and that's going to go straight into our wok fry. And then you'll notice I have a second knob of ginger here, and what we're going to do is do the same thing with this ginger, but we're going to throw it into the bowl with our meatballs. So same deal, we're starting off with our dice first. With slices down the center, one down the middle, and then that's our dice. And then same deal, we're just going to run our knife through it. If you are particularly averse to doing knife work, I would say, in my personal opinion, if you're getting into cooking a lot of Chinese food, you should get good at doing this because it happens in pretty much every single Chinese recipe that I've ever come across. But if you don't like doing knife work, you can also grab a microplane, and you can do this straight through the microplane, and it will also achieve pretty much the same thing. But if you want to save yourself some dishes, it really, really helps to know how to do a fine mince, because then you don't have to watch your microplane. Alright, so this is going into our meatball bowl again as well. And then we're going to move on to a couple other ingredients. James, yeah, thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Alright, so next up for our meatballs, so we're just going to go straight down through all of the veggies that are going to go into our meatballs. So we're going to do everything for our meatballs except for the meat. We're going to get to that meat dead last. Alright, so next up what I have here are some water chestnuts. So water chestnuts are super, super useful for a couple of reasons. The number one thing that I love about water chestnuts is that they don't taste like anything. They have no taste whatsoever. The other great thing about it is that they're pantry friendly, so you can buy them in a can and they will stay for a very, very long time in that can. You can even open that can up and then throw them in your refrigerator, and they will stay in the refrigerator for quite a while too. And the other great thing that I like about it is that since they don't taste like anything, we can use them just to add a little bit of crunch. So since they're pretty much flavorless, what we're trying to get out of these is to add a little bit of like unusual texture to the meatball, so that in each bite of that meatball there's a nice surprising bit of crunch, which is going to be kind of like an iconic thing that you will find in a lion's head meatball, is that every like half a bite or so you'll find a nice little surprising bit of water chestnut that has like a slightly different texture from the rest of the meatball. So we were, the last time I cooked this on stream, someone was asking about like appropriate substitutes, and someone mentioned a jicama, which might be very, very similar. My favorite substitute is, when I can't find water chestnut, my favorite substitute is bamboo shoots. Which actually, when I said that, I also realized that that also might be kind of hard to find. So if you can't find water chestnuts, you might not be able to find bamboo shoots either. But I think like the quality about them is that neither of them really taste like anything. They're pretty crunchy, so you can get this nice bit of crunch in your meatball without adding any kind of real flavor to it. So that's also going into our meatball. We have refined mince here. That is our water chestnut. Oh, is the mic seizuring? Check. Yeah, that might just be this stupid knife. I think this way. Yeah. So if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're watching on Reddit, we've been raising money to replace this stupid mic. If you're watching on YouTube, actually what we're doing right now over on YouTube, we're doing a charity stream. My buddy Brent has a friend that's in the hospital, and we're trying to raise some money because they're doing a GoFundMe to help cover some medical bills, and it is not going super well. They're like 15 grand short of their goal right now, so it's they need some money. So if you're have the means to do so, hop over to YouTube and check out the charity stream because they need our help. Yeah. Big Brown Bear, yeah, I'm totally reading the chat. But the chat is often super delayed, and very, very often the chat happens so fast that sometimes I miss stuff. So if I miss your question or if I miss something that happened in the chat, feel free to repeat yourself. Because I miss stuff all the time. What kind of knife is it, Jake? Yeah, it's a... There's so much airtime we can talk about this stuff. So it's a French chef's knife. It's more specifically, it's a vintage French chef's knife by a brand called Père Noir Nogent, and I'm positive that I'm saying that wrong. The Père Noir Nogent brand is probably a little bit more obscure because I don't think that they continued production after like the 70s or 80s. So this is a knife that I found at an estate sale a while back. Which is super cool. My favorite quality about it is that it's made of carbon steel, so that's why it has this nice patina to it. It kind of like ages with as much as you use it. Probably the more familiar knife that you would associate that shape with is a sabatier, which is what this is. So if you're looking for a similar knife, I would look into sabatiers because those are actually still in production. They're actively made still. All right, so next up for our meatballs, the last thing that I just added was a single egg, and that's going to give us a little bit of volume and binding quality. And then we're also going to add is half a cup of panko breadcrumb. So if you're keeping track, the things that don't belong in a Shanghainese lion's head meatball. The one thing, well, a couple things probably don't belong, but the one thing that really doesn't belong is panko breadcrumb. Panko breadcrumb comes from Japanese cuisine, and is probably like the most common thing that you would associate with is chicken katsu, which I actually just did a recipe video for. And that breaded texture of fried chicken that's associated with chicken katsu. That's all coming from the use of panko breadcrumb. In a really, really traditional Shanghainese lion's head meatball, definitely the Dragon House lion's head meatball that we're trying to mimic right now, it would use cornstarch, not panko breadcrumb. So if you are trying to keep it gluten-free, I would say leave that panko out and then replace it with cornstarch, and that would actually be more traditional than what you would actually find in like a traditional Shanghainese lion's head meatball. So I've talked this over with my dad quite a bit. And he insists that you have to use cornstarch. I've tried it both ways, and I personally like using panko because I think it binds better and it gives you a more crunchy and tender meatball. So if you're interested, try both ways and see which way works best for you. All right, next up, I'm adding a few different seasonings to our bowl here before we add our meat, and that's going to kind of help build out a little bit of flavor for our meat before we add it to the bowl. That's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce to start, followed by 2 tablespoons of sesame oil. Next up are our dry ingredients. So probably actually, in my opinion, maybe the most important flavor of a Shanghainese lion's head meatball, at least in the meatball itself, is a tiny pinch of Chinese 5-spice powder, which has a couple of different qualities to it, but in my opinion, probably the most predominant thing that you get from Chinese 5-spice is the flavor of star anise and cinnamon. So it kind of has an interesting, like, savory, but slightly, like, sweet flavor to it that you get from that Chinese 5-spice. And that's, like, a really iconic flavor to Chinese food. And the very last thing that I just threw in was a pinch of white pepper, which is very, very closely associated to MSG. So if you're looking for where the MSG in this recipe lives, it was right there in that white pepper. Oh, Big Brown, yeah, Mr. Fix-It, yeah, how's it going? Thank you for hopping over from Reddit. That's cool. Charles, how's it going? Yeah. Oh, Hermina's in the hospital today. Oh, that's terrible. Tell Hermina I said hi, and hopefully she gets better soon. That sucks. So many people in the hospital lately. Yeah, that's really terrible. Okay. Next up, I'm adding my meat to our mixing bowl here. So probably the most traditional thing, and usually when I make lion's head meatball, I use just a full pound of ground pork. Today what we're using, I'm going to test out a split on this meat right now. So what I'm using is that's half a pound of ground pork and half a pound of ground turkey, which I think, I'm not positive, but I think it's going to work out really well because both have quite a bit of fat to it, so it will bind together a little bit better. Or I could be wrong, and this could be a complete mixture, so we'll find out. But definitely, if you're trying to like make a really, really traditional lion's head meatball, the super traditional version it would just have just ground pork, so a whole pound of ground pork. And definitely in the original recipe that I had written, it only uses ground pork, and that's like probably the most traditional approach to a lion's head meatball. And I'm just kind of mixing this up until all of the large clumps of meat are sort of broken down, and we're really just trying to get, I would say like the big objective here is to make sure that the panko breadcrumb and the eggs sort of break down and kind of start binding with our meat here. And that's going to be really, really important to make sure that our meatballs have some good structure. If they don't bind properly, then they're sort of going to fall apart in the wok. Yeah, that's looking good. Cool. I'm going to set this aside. This will probably take maybe five minutes or so to marinate. We're probably not going to give it the full amount of time that it needs to marinate, but that's okay. All right. Scotch grass, yeah, so it's technically, yeah, I guess you could qualify that as a chef's knife. I would say, like, when people think of a chef's knife, I mean, like, I take that back, it is definitely a chef's knife, so it is definitely a chef's knife, but when most people think of a chef's knife, what they're thinking of is more specifically probably a German chef's knife. So, like, it generally would have the size and shape of an 8-inch, probably like an 8-inch Westhoff or some kind of copy of an 8-inch Westhoff, which would look like this. Lately, like, Japanese knives have been really, really popular, so you might see that shape and size from a Japanese chef's knife. A French chef's knife has a cut and profile that looks more similar like this, where it's like a little bit slimmer in profile, and it's also slightly longer. So you'll notice, this is my 8-inch chef's knife. This is just a standard Ginsu, and it is much, much shorter. So it is, I think, 2 inches shorter, maybe something like that. So it takes a little bit getting used to. So the Ginsu, I think, is 8 inches, and I believe my French knife is 10 inches, or maybe 12. I can't remember now. All right. So while we wait for our meat to marinate, I'm going to start chopping up the rest of our veggies here. So this is some baby bok choy that we're getting to right now. You could also do this with just plain old bok choy, but I have personally loved the use of baby bok choy because it tends to be a little bit more tender and have like not quite as a chewy bite to it as full-grown bok choy. So really all it is that it's just picked a little bit earlier, so you'll notice that it's a lot smaller than your standard piece of bok choy. So this is actually a pretty large piece. But generally it would look something like this. A full-grown bok choy would be like much larger, and we would have to cut it a lot smaller. The quality that I love about baby bok choy though is mainly that it is really tender and is like a little bit easier to chew into, which is like, at least when I was a kid, the one thing that I hated about bok choy is that it's really chewy and difficult to eat, and that was probably the main reason why I had to like choke it down so much, is because it's so chewy. So whenever I use bok choy, I love using baby choy to kind of give it a little bit less chew to it. A little bit more. I'm gonna cut up a couple more pieces. And some of the bok choy that I've purchased more recently, it has started flowering, so it kind of looks like this. You can totally eat this stuff. It is totally edible. But I personally don't like eating it because I found that it is really bitter. And it's just one of those things that I used to avoid when I was a kid because it's so bitter. But if you don't mind a little bit of a bitter taste to your bok choy, that stuff is totally edible. You can totally eat it. Alright, so I'm getting my bok choy a good rinse with a little bit of fruit wash. And most importantly about our bok choy right now is we want to make sure that we shake as much of this water out. Yeah, good entertainment. Yeah, good question. I was just talking about that. We definitely want to wash it. Anytime you get something from Chinatown, you definitely want to wash it. So I bought this at the market down the street from me, which means that anytime, the reason that I say that is if you're buying fresh veggies from Chinatown, probably it's because it's sitting out on the sidewalk. So it's like literally open to open air. So there's definitely no food safety or like food cleanliness in Chinese groceries. But give it a good rinse. I use a fruit wash to make sure all of this stuff is really clean before I start throwing it into the wok. But definitely give it a good rinse. The other reason that you make sure you want to rinse this stuff off is because oftentimes it's picked straight from the ground, which means that you'll find like bugs in it sometimes, just like lettuce. So you want to give that stuff a good rinse and get like really in there with this in these like little corners to make sure that there's no like bugs left behind and stuff. But most importantly, after we give it a good wash, is that you want to make sure and rinse and shake out all of this water, because if any of this water is left behind and that ends up in our wok, then that's going to start causing a big problem for us during the wok fry, because it's going to start dropping the temperature of the wok. So we need this to be relatively dry. It doesn't need to be like bone dry, but we need to shake out as much excess water as we can before we start cooking with it. So, the last thing that I'm going to throw together before we head over or start working on our meatballs, I should say, is our braising sauce, which is a very specific type of sauce, and like as I found, is a very specific type of sauce because it is really dark. So this is going to be a much darker sauce than most of the other sauces that I have assembled in the past. Because it is that's like the quality of a Shanghainese lion's head meatball. Is we're going to sear these meatballs to a really crisp quality, and then we're going to braise it in a really dark soy sauce, and that's going to give us this really like nice, interesting depth of flavor. The other thing that I love about that dark braising sauce is that you can eat it with rice, so that like if you run out of meatballs and all you have is sauce left, you can totally just put that over some rice. And it will also have like a little bit of ginger and garlic in it, so it will be really tasty with just a little bit of white rice. Kind of like eating rice with soy sauce. The main reason that I know that is because when I was a kid, my brother and I used to fight over the last meatball, and he would generally win. But all I got were the scraps, which is the sauce. Alright, so for our braising sauce, I'm starting off with that's 4 tablespoons of plain old soy sauce. followed by a single tablespoon of sesame oil. Don't forget that there's also sesame oil in our meatballs, so we want to go easy on that stuff because it's in another source in this recipe already. Next up is 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine. Shaoxing wine is a Chinese cooking wine, probably most closely similar to dry cooking sherry, so if you can't find Shaoxing wine, pick up some dry cooking sherry and it will be very, very similar. Next up is a single tablespoon of oyster sauce. As the name implies, oyster sauce is derived from the fermentation of oyster. But more importantly, it is also very, very dark, which is going to contribute largely to that color that we're looking for here. Then I'm following this up with, this is 2 tablespoons of sweet chili sauce. So if you've never heard of sweet chili sauce, you might more colloquially know it as the sweet and sour sauce that's oftentimes you eat it with egg rolls. So you find it on the Lazy Susan and a lot of Chinese restaurants next to the soy sauce. My favorite one is the Mapoi version, which I think you can actually find in a lot of Safeways. At least here in the Bay Area, you can find it in a lot of American grocery stores. I love using it in really, really small quantities in recipes like this because it adds a little bit of sugar to recipes that need kind of a little bit more punch to it. But we're not using straight ahead sugar, so. Bananas are bad fruits. Yeah, I'm glad this is super helpful. I love that username. That's I too hate bananas. I think that they are dumb fruits. The only scenario where I love a good banana is if it's cooked. But if I'm eating bananas and they're not cooked, I love fried plantains and stuff like that. But I also hate bananas. That's a great username. All right, next up, what I'm adding is 3 teaspoons, not tablespoons. This recipe is wrong. I guess you could call this spicy chili crisp. I think that's what the jar says, is spicy chili crisp. The Chinese name is a gan lan ma, but what we're looking for in English is spicy chili crisp. And the thing that we really are looking for here is this old lady on the cover. This is the one that you want, is the one with the old lady on the front. And I actually think I saw that tip once come up on an Uncle Roger video. Which is funny, but also actually really, really true, is that when you're shopping for Chinese sauces, the one that you're looking for, if you're trying to avoid the big name brand stuff, so don't try and get Lee Cup, look for the one with the old grandma on it. That's the one that you're looking for. Last up is a single tablespoon of dark soy sauce. If you're trying to keep track, the 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce and the 1 tablespoon of dark soy sauce, that's where all of the really dark, rich color and richness to our sauce is going to come from. So you'll notice this sauce is very, very dark because everything that we just added to it is very, very dark. So there's not going to be a lot of dilution going on here. That's very intentional. We're looking for that really, really dark quality to it because it's going to help us create that really, really dark and deeply, deeply umami flavored sauce that we're looking for. Cool. And that is it for our sauce. Now let's make some meatballs. Alright, next up, I finally cleaned my sizzle tray, so it's not gross anymore. What we're going to do is weigh out our meatballs. So this, I've discovered, is actually really, really important with meatballs. Because if you're not very, very specifically accurate with how much your meatballs weigh, you can end up with one very unusually sized meatball, which is the worst. So what we want to do is we're looking for each of our meatballs, they need to be about 2.5 ounces each. If you're off by a little, that's okay. But if you're off by a lot, what will happen is that when you finish the 7th meatball, this should be an 8. But when you finish that 7th meatball, the 8th meatball is going to look really, really weird. It's going to be way, way too small. Most of the time, you will notice that I'm don't particularly harp on accuracy, measurement accuracies. You notice that when I do tablespoons, I'm not actually using a tablespoon. When many teaspoons. That's not actually a teaspoon either. That's just a regular spoon. But what I do harp on is that, like, when you chop up things and when you are measuring things that are gonna go into the wok, we want that to be really, really specifically accurate, because if you chop anything that's uneven, or if you measure or roll out a meatball, for example, that's uneven, what you're gonna end up with is an uneven cook. So uneven chop equals uneven cook, so that's never a good thing. So I'm looking for, this should be three ounces of meatball, 3 ounces of meat per meatball. And yeah, cool. Yeah, so we're looking for 3 ounces for each meatball. Try and be as accurate as possible to make sure that the last meatball is not a weird shape. Very important. And what should happen, as long as we don't mess this up, and as long as I didn't mismeasure anything, is this should yield exactly 8 meatballs that are 3 ounces. Don't we usually fry them? Yeah, so we're going to fry them in a wok. So we're going to sear them in a wok fry first. With a really, really high heat, so that high heat is going to give us a really, really crispy meatball. And then we're going to pull them out and then saute them, or saute and then braise them in our wok following that. So they're going to cook twice. The first time is going to be in a sear, the second time will be in a braise. It's called the ugly meatball, and it's usually the best. Oh yeah, I guess that's a good point. Yeah, it's the ugly meatball, and usually what happens is the ugly meatball is the chef's snack, so it's the one that you eat that doesn't actually make it to the dinner table. So the chef's snack or the Scooby snack. But more often than not, at least with this particular recipe, more often than not is when you have an unusually sized meatball, it just cooks unevenly, so it will probably just burn, which is the worst possible thing that can happen. Unless you're paying very specific attention, then you have to cook that meatball in a specific way. This is off. There we go. Random art pinner. You're jealous of the table, yeah. I love this cutting board. Actually, people have been asking about this cutting board more lately. It's nothing fancy. I got it at Bed Bath & Beyond or something, somewhere random. But what I love about it is that it has grips at the bottom, so the board doesn't slip around, which makes it super, super useful. And I think I mismeasured these meatballs again. Let's see how small this meatball is. Ugh. Ounce short on this meatball. Yeah, so we have one tiny meatball. Happens. Oh well. Alright, so that's our meatballs. So if you're keeping track, I said 3 ounces. It should really be closer to 2 3/4, so probably 2.75 ounces, which would be the actual number. It's tough with ounces though, because we added a bunch of stuff to the meatball, so we can't just divide it. Makes it tricky. So that's our meatballs, and then we're gonna start frying. Alright, so over on the stove, I'm starting to preheat my wok here. We want this thing ripping hot, so you want to make sure that this thing is very, very hot before we're cooking on it. Oops, YouTube going crazy. So that means that we need to give it plenty of time to heat up. That will probably take about a minute, maybe a little bit more than that. Yeah, what do we use to keep them together? Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually talked about it a little bit earlier. So in a really, really traditional Chinese lion's head meatball, the binding agent is cornstarch, so you would find the use of cornstarch very, very often. So that's the way that my dad swears by doing it. I personally have found that when I use cornstarch, it doesn't bind together quite as well, which makes it doesn't quite give as tender and a meatball. So one of two things generally, in my experience, so this is a universal truth because I know that plenty of people have made lion's head meatball with cornstarch, including my dad. But usually when I make it with cornstarch, what happens is either one of two things will happen. Is the one thing that will happen is that it's overcooked on the inside and then undercooked on the exterior. Or the second thing that will happen is that it sears really, really quickly on the outside, and then we don't get quite as tender of a meat on the inside. So what I have loved doing is using panko as our binding agent, which is like a breadcrumb. And that breadcrumb, in my experience, it kind of like binds things together a little bit and kind of yields a little bit more tenderness to the meatball, which is like works a little bit better than cornstarch. But I would also say is if you are trying to keep this recipe gluten-free, which lots of people have asked me about, you can totally do it with cornstarch, and that is also like probably the most traditional way of doing a lion's head meatball is with cornstarch, not panko. Good question though. Yeah. Totally. Cool. So my wok is heating up right now. It has lots of smoke billowing off, which is a good sign. I'm going to give that another minute before it's ready to go. Before I start, hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST, and new recipes, those are coming out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So tomorrow we're releasing a Japanese white miso curry that I've been doing for quite a while now. That's going to come out over on the YouTube channel. So if you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. We've been releasing recipes over there on that channel every Friday for I can't remember how long, but for a long time now. So if you're looking for the recipes that go with everything that I cook, that all lives over on the YouTube channel. Those recipes, they tend to move a little bit slower, and I like to talk through some of the decision making that goes behind the recipes. We kind of also I love talking about like where those recipes are inspired from. So the curry that's coming out tomorrow is inspired by a series that we've been doing that's dedicated to reproducing foods from the San Francisco Bay Area. The curry that's coming out tomorrow is based off of a curry that you can find in San Francisco at a cafe called Bazaar Cafe. We've been doing a whole bunch of stuff from around the neighborhood. So there's a couple of recipes that are dedicated to like just places in Oakland. So we did a couple of Thai dishes from Nicha Thai here in Oakland. There's a couple of dishes from Shooting Star in Chinatown, and just all over the city, which has been really, really fun. We have another series that's dedicated to just cooking Chinese American foods, which is one that I love doing. Because essentially what we end up doing is like deconstructing a lot of Chinese American classics from places like P.F. Chang's and Panda Express, stuff like that. And then kind of taking a look at what are the American qualities about those dishes and what it looks like if we remove those American qualities and reassembled it as if it were traditional Chinese food. So that's really, really interesting with a dish like General Tso's chicken, for example, because General Tso's chicken is not Chinese at all. It's really just American food. That's really just American fried chicken. So if you try and assemble a General Tso's chicken in the lens of traditional Chinese cooking, it looks very, very interesting because it will probably turn out, what happens is it turns out like something that you have probably never had before. So it's like American fried chicken that's braised in a really, really traditional Chinese. So it actually came out like a lot like what we're about to cook, whereas essentially fried chicken that's braised in the braising sauce that we're using right now. So stuff like that all comes out over on the YouTube channel. So if you're interested in content like that, I recommend hopping over to YouTube and checking out what's going on over there. We've been doing new recipes every Friday for like coming up on a year now, so that's really fun. So there are a lot of recipes. I think there's over 50 recipes now. So some people like to binge them, and just like I've heard people like to watch me chop stuff. So I've heard that lots of people have started binging those. So that's really fun. So if you want to help us, we're working our way to 2,700 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit that subscriber goal, hop over to YouTube, check out what's going on over there. Yeah, bananas are bad foods. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that it's informative and helpful. Do I like Indian food? I love Indian food. I'm really, really scared to try and reproduce Indian food. Anytime that I try and reproduce food that is not part of the culture that I come from, I approach it very tentatively because I don't know anything about it. So I have been working on a chicken tikka masala recipe for a long time, like 6 months at least. And I've done it maybe 6 times and have messed it up every single time. So Indian food is one of those that I like touch on it very, very hesitantly because I'm scared of it, because I think I'm gonna mess it up. But yeah, I've definitely been working on some Indian stuff. I've kind of nailed down a biryani that I'm really stoked for. That's probably gonna come up eventually. But the really like the heavy stuff, so like the paneer masalas, any of the masalas, even naan is tricky. All of those things, I'm kind of dipping my toes in it. Cranky Hermit, yeah, what oil should you use in a wok? Anything that's high heat, so definitely not olive oil. Probably olive oil is the one thing that you should avoid. Anything that's high heat though, so vegetable oil, canola oil, grapeseed oil. I love using grapeseed oil, mostly because it's really cheap, so you can buy it in really large volumes. Today we're going to be using peanut oil, which is probably the most traditional type of oil to use in a wok fry. The one thing that I will say is that if you're going to use peanut oil in your wok fries, remember that peanut oil is not neutral. It is high heat, but it is not neutral, which means that if you're frying something that you don't want to taste like peanut, so say like a fried egg or something, that's not a good oil to have on hand if it's the only high heat oil that you have. So usually when I buy oil, there's only one kind of high heat oil on hand, which means that if your only high heat oil is peanut, and then you go to fry an egg, your eggs are going to taste like peanuts, which is not great. Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, anything with a high smoke temperature like peanut. David, what are we drinking today? We're drinking Templeton Rye. Are we drinking? No, we're drinking Monkey Shoulder, which is a scotch. Monkey Shoulder is one of my favorite affordable scotches. That's a good. You could get a bottle of Monkey Shoulder for I think under $40, and it is a very drinkable scotch. Single malt too, I think. All right, so our wok is ripping hot. I'm going to add some oil to the wok here. We need quite a bit. That's about 4 tablespoons. And then we're going to do our long yao, which is essentially adding cold oil to a hot wok and then give it a swirl. And that's going to create our nice non-stick surface for us to sear on. And then let's add some meatballs. I'm going to go 4 at a time here, so we don't want to overload the wok, otherwise the temperature of the wok will start dropping. So very, very important is to make sure that we're not overloading the wok. Otherwise, we're going to end up with undercooked meatballs. Alright, so we're looking for some deep browning on each side of those meatballs. So I think usually it takes about, for me, 2 minutes, maybe a little bit more than 2 minutes. Kind of depends on how hot that wok is. And we're looking for a really, really deep crisp to it before we split it and then sear the next side. Lauren, you're American from Houston. Yeah, good to see you. You're American from Chicago. That's great. Yeah. That's cool to see so many people from all over the world. That's really interesting. I'm here in Oakland. I live in Oakland, Chinatown, which is great. I love living in Oakland, Chinatown because I can get my hands on all of the ingredients that I use are really like easily locally sourced. So. But I also know that like lots of folks who are like in Houston, for example, will have some trouble sourcing some of the ingredients that I'm using. So if you have any questions about like substitutions, lots of people ask about substitutions. Feel free and ask me about them. I know we use a bunch of stuff that's hard to find, so ask me about it, and we can definitely dig into it. That sort of stuff, substitution stuff, that also comes up in a lot of those recipe videos too. So if you're interested in finding out more about how these recipes come together, that's a good place to be. Is it by San Francisco? Yeah, Oakland is about 10 miles away from San Francisco. It's right across the bridge. So if you're like looking at the Bay Area, San Francisco is on one side of the bay, Oakland is on the other side of the bay, so it's right across the bridge. So on a good day of traffic, it's about a 10-minute drive to San Francisco from here. On a bad day of traffic, it's about an hour and a half sometimes. All right, so I'm giving the meatballs a slight flip. We don't want to flip it all the way because we need to get that browning all the way around the meatball. So we're going to be flipping it a few times here. and we're looking for a deep browning on each side. What is important to remember, and this is also something that you'll probably learn from flipping hamburgers too, is that it will never sear as well on the second side as the first side. I think that has maybe something to do with moisture leaving the ground mince. But don't be discouraged if you can't get as good of a sear on the second side as the first one. You go to San Francisco, so yeah, cool. I'm working on setting something up with an organization called Chef, S-H-E-F, where we'll be able to deliver food to people in the Bay Area. So if you happen to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, keep an eye on the YouTube channel, and we'll be announcing some foods that will be available for delivery pretty soon. So I guess like the idea being that if you live in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can watch some of the foods on stream, and then you can order it. So you can order the food that I'm cooking. It would be really cool. Oh, you live in Berkeley? Yeah, David, that's cool. I went to Cal, so I know lots of stuff near Cal. Most of it is stuff that you go do as a cheap, broke college student, though. I love stuff, David. I love the stuff in like the Asian ghetto. So Gypsies, I think Gypsies is still there. I have been actually working on hacking some recipes from a spot on University called Kips, which I think Kips is still there too. They have like some really classic, like Hong Kong style Chinese food. Man, I can't remember all of them. Most of these are places that you would go to if you're a broke college student. Yeah, Godfather. Yeah, cool. Totally. What's that? There's a good sandwich shop. I think it's called Cheese. Fuck, forget what it's called now. Oh, where do you buy a wok and will it fit on a standard American oven? Yeah. So that's a couple questions. Woks will fit on a standard American oven. There are a couple of caveats. I would say if you're cooking on an electric range, look for something that's flat-bottomed. Or definitely, I would even say is if you've never owned a wok before, look for something that's flat-bottomed, especially though if you're cooking on an induction top or an electric coil range. Because a flat-bottomed wok has a heavy bottom to it, which will make it behave a little bit more similarly to how a standard frying pan behaves. So it kind of has the heat retention the way that a frying pan does. And just generally, like, it's going to act like the same way that most of your frying pans that you've worked with before will. My wok is a round bottom wok, so you'll notice that my wok kind of rolls around a lot. That's because it has a round bottom to it. It will also work on a gas range, but it has a learning curve to it. Mainly because it doesn't have a flat bottom, as you probably noticed, which makes things kind of move around in it a little bit differently. So I love my round bottom wok because you can toss in it really easily. So you can do wok tosses really nicely with that round bottom. But you definitely cannot do the similar things that you would do in a flat bottom pan. So. As for where to get it, I got my wok at a restaurant supply store. Here in Oakland, it's a restaurant supply store called Chanko. It's nothing fancy. I think this wok was like $10. What's more important is the material that it's made out of. So my wok is made out of carbon steel, which I love. I've also owned cast iron woks, are really, really great, especially for electric top ranges. I've also had stainless steel woks, which work really great. The only thing that I avoid is anything that's non-stick. Don't buy a wok that has non-stick coatings because it won't get hot enough. Alright, these are nice and seared. I'm going to start pulling them out. I've cooked this dish so many times that I have gotten pretty good at eyeballing these. If you want to be really specific about it though, the internal temperature that we're looking for is 160 degrees F. I'm going to let that one go a little bit longer to get a little bit sear on that side. So if you're not sure, get out a meat thermometer and check the temperature inside. Yeah, that's a good point. Good entertainment. That's the last thing that I'll mention about woks. Is what's really, really important about a wok is not so much like the brand of it, is how it's seasoned. So that seasoning comes from just using it a lot. So when I first bought this wok, everything stuck to it. I came really close to throwing it out and trying something different. But what's really, really important, this is actually true for anything that's made of carbon steel too, is that you get a wok that you season. So just use it, and it will develop its own seasoning. But if you don't use it, it won't develop that seasoning. So just like any cast iron pan. All right, the next 4 meatballs, these are going in. I'm repeating. Yeah, good question. Can you not cook more than 4 at a time? So what I'm being really careful of, so I would say that actually ties back to the last thing that I said, is if you had a flat bottom wok, it might work a little bit better. So maybe if I was using my cast iron pan because it has a flat bottom, you could probably sear more than 4. Because there would be more surface area for it to sit on. But you'll notice that my wok curves up here because it's round. So if we tried to stack stuff on top, those meatballs will probably end up somewhere over here, where in the wok, that's not directly over the flame, so we wouldn't get enough heat. So the properties of a wok are that it's very, very thin. So if you're not directly over the induction flame or over where the flame is, that the heat of the wok is not going to disperse as well. So this part of the wok, like right around here on the exterior, it's not going to be nearly as hot as this area right here. We could probably do it, but it would probably undercook, and we wouldn't get as good of a sear. So I just like going 4 at a time, mostly because we're definitely not going to get 8 at a time. So if we have to do it in 2 batches, this might as well do it 4 at a time. But also because if it ends up on that side, on part of that side, it probably is not going to get an even sear. But if you have a flat bottom wok, that's also why I mentioned if you have a flat bottom wok, you could probably fit more on that flat bottom than you would if you had a round bottom wok. Rich Baz, yeah, this recipe, it is already on YouTube. I can link it actually. I should be linking it actually. Good question. Link it over on YouTube too. Yeah, good question. It is already on YouTube. I posted the recipe for this meatball. I think that came up maybe last month, maybe a month or 2 ago. So that already lives over on YouTube. So if you haven't checked that stuff out, lots of fun stuff going on over there. Those recipe videos, they tend to move a little bit slower, so we kind of like talk our way through some of the things that I'm doing. And kind of like, lots of times what ends up happening is I'll talk through some of the mistakes that I made while I was testing the recipe out. Which in this particular case, I definitely messed it up at least twice. I think the biggest thing that I messed up is that I used a really, really lean cut of meat for one of my attempts, and it burned really badly. So that's like kind of the most important quality about the ground mince that we're using today is we're using a combination of ground pork and ground turkey, both of which have a lot of fat to it, which means that we're going to get a nice crisp browning to it because of all of that fat. D Nova, yeah, totally. You're not too late. We're still searing. So we're still searing, and also the replay. It's up on YouTube too. Bananas are bad fruits. Your experience is mostly orange chicken at Panda Express. That's totally okay. I have actually cooked a whole bunch of stuff from Panda Express now, so I can also tell you that the orange chicken from Panda Express is very intimidating because people are very specifically protective about the way that orange chicken tastes, so you can't mess around with that one. But yeah, I have hacked a number of recipes from Panda Express. That's also over on the YouTube channel. And it's because I have a series that's happening where I've been reproducing foods from like Chinese American cuisine. So I've done the Panda Express, I've done their General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, kung pao chicken, their Beijing beef, I've done that one. I did the P.F. Chang's Mongolian beef, that came out recently. That came out last Friday actually. What else did we do? The P.F. Chang's Mushu pork, that came out pretty recently too. There's a whole bunch of stuff in that series now. And it's really interesting because usually in that series I'll do 2 different versions. and the first version will usually be like a really like honest attempt at the original version and what like the American version of those dishes look like. And then the second attempt will usually be like a more adventurous version, more properties, and reproduce it if it were like traditional Chinese cooking. Kind of taking a look at like what do those dishes look like if they're like really, really traditional. Yeah, the small one is definitely burning. That's like the big pitfall of like not measuring your meatballs correctly, is that the smallest one is definitely going to burn for sure. But yeah, so if you're interested in stuff like that, hop over to the YouTube, check out what's going on over there. We also have a concurrent live stream going on behind me. So this laptop that's behind me, that goes to YouTube. And I've been told it looks better on desktop. We also have nicer cameras too, so you can see these nicer cameras. So that nice DSLR. And this GoPro that's hanging from the stove. Yeah, that's looking good. I'm gonna pull this small one out. Maybe a little bit longer. Yeah, a little bit longer. What temp do I have it at? Yeah, so anytime that I'm working with a wok, we want it as literally as hot as that wok will get to. And that's just because woks are very, very thin. So this wok is literally just a thin piece of carbon steel. There's nothing else to it. So there's no heavy bottom to it. There's no coating to it. There's nothing that's going on that's going to help it retain heat. So anytime that you're working in a wok, that heat, and your heat needs to be cranked up all the way. So this is as hot as my burner will go. And that's going to just keep that wok hot. So if we turn the fire down, it will lose all heat. So you will notice that when I cook in a wok, I very rarely moderate the heat of the stove. Anyone is burned. Let's go for a little bit longer. I'm gonna let those last two go for a little bit longer, and we should be ready for our braise next. Do I consider being a chef is the same skill as an engineer? Oh. Good question. I think that I'm not an engineer, so I don't know that I'm equipped to answer that question. I think I am certified to talk about music because I do have a degree in music. So what I'll say is the way that I think about cooking is very, very similar to the way that I think about making music. In that, like, a lot of it is just about like understanding how a recipe works. So what are the ingredients that are in this recipe, and what are they doing? So we're kind of like taking a look at like what are the things that I just put in, and what are they serving for this recipe. So like, for example, we're using ground pork. So what is that ground pork actually doing in this recipe? Well, it has like a lot of fat to it, which is going to help it sear really well. So like, more importantly, to know about this recipe is not just that we're using ground pork, but like why are we using ground pork? So like, what is the property of ground pork that's so important? So like, oh, heavy fat. And that's like really, really interesting to know, because then you can do things like, well, what if, like, for example, today, what if we did something like split the ground pork with some ground turkey instead? And the reason that I know that we can do that is because I know that ground turkey also has a lot of fat, but has some other flavor qualities to it that might be a little bit different and a little bit interesting to add to a recipe. So, which kind of like, in the way that I think about it, reminds me a lot of the way that a song comes together. So when you're working on songwriting, we do a very similar thing. Is we like think about the properties that we're adding to a song and adjust the song accordingly. So it reminds me a lot about music production, which is the other thing that I do, and also actually have like credentialed degrees to do. So anyway, so we're done searing. So I just poured out my used fryer oil, and then we put this back on the stove to start reheating. You will notice the one thing that I did do is I poured out my fryer oil into a jar here. So super, super important. is this is just a jar of used fry oil from all of the various times that I have cooked in a wok. Really, really important is that you don't want to let that excess fat and oil go down your drain, because if it goes down your sink, then it will start coagulating at the bottom of your sink, and then you're going to end up with a clogged sink. So really, really important. Don't let that used fryer grease end up in your sink, because you will clog your sink, which I have done multiple times. So I've only recently started to be really careful. I've always known that that's a problem, but I've only recently started giving more of a crap about it. So I'm going to wipe down my wok here. So you'll notice there's all of this brown stuff. Oops. You'll notice that there's all of this brown stuff on my wok. This is all coming off from wiping it down. But other than that, it's pretty clean already, which is the great quality about woks. Alright, so I'm going to reheat my wok, and then we're going to get going on our braise next. Lots of questions. You always get the cheese rangoons. Yeah, cheese rangoons. Yeah, that's definitely an American thing. The first time I had cheese rangoons, I did not understand what they were, which they're like essentially deep fried wontons with cheese in them. I could not understand like what those were. But what I will say is they're really good because it's deep fried and it has cheese in it. So what's wrong with that? No, don't see a problem with that. Yeah, what about cleanup and care? So, Rich Bass, this is a good question. So that's basically what we just did. So if your wok is properly seasoned, which mine is, you can rinse it off. So all I did was I poured off our used fryer oil first, and then I gave it a rinse in the sink, and then wiped it down with a paper towel. And at the very end, we're also going to run through how to season it before we move on and put it away. But for now, we don't actually have to season it because we still have some more cooking to do. But usually, essentially all we're doing is we're wiping it down with a paper towel, getting all of that grime off. And it is, right now, it's pretty much essential. We could actually put this away because it's pretty much clean already. But we're not done cooking, so I'm not going to put it away yet. Yeah. Dr. Yu, yeah, thank you. Yeah. Cool, yeah. All right. What are we? Oh yeah, Mythic Wasteland. Or what are we cooking? Today, hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're doing a Shanghainese lion's head meatball, which is like a pretty common, like Chinese comfort food. I refer to it as like Chinese comfort food, mostly because it's a comfort food for me. It's a dish that I've been eating since I was a little kid. It's called in Chinese it's called a Shizitou, which is essentially, it kind of reminds me of a Swedish meatball. The way the Swedish meatball is done, in which it's seared and then it's braised, but a Swedish meatball is braised in cream sauce. Today we're going to be braising in a dark soy sauce. But it is, the reason that it's called a lion's head meatball is because it's a really, really large meatball. It's like generally like, I would say, about the size of like a baseball, maybe a little bit smaller than a baseball, so maybe closer to a tennis ball. And it's one of those dishes that we can serve as like in family style, and then serve up and like split between a couple of folks. So, if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We're about to move on to our braise and wok fry, and then our braise, which should start coming together pretty quickly. So feel free and drop your questions in the chat. If you haven't yet, also remember to hop over to YouTube and check out what's going on over there. We are also concurrently live streaming, which is the screen behind me. Lots of fun stuff going on over there, including the concurrent live stream. But in addition to that live stream, there's also a schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking next. That's also where all of the recipes live. So every Friday we're coming out with new recipes. So this was a recipe that came out, I would say like a month ago now. I think that was back in like January or February we did the lion's head meatball. All of those recipes, those come up over on YouTube. And in those recipes, we kind of move a little bit slower and talk through some of the things that are going on in the recipe. So if you haven't checked that stuff out yet, definitely hop over to YouTube, check out what's going on over there. We've got new recipes coming out every Friday. So this Friday coming up is going to be Japanese white miso curry, which if you've watched these streams before, I have cooked them many times on stream. But it was also, I think, maybe the second recipe that I ever released on that channel. And I did not like how it turned out in the first recipe, so I'm gonna redo it. All right. Yeah. Dog, yeah. What's up, dog? Someone already said it. Damn. All right. Yeah, Dr. Yu, thank you, yeah. Cool. All right, so if you're ever not sure if your wok is hot enough, the first sign that we're looking for when we're preheating the wok is all of this smoke. The smoke is really, really important because if you don't see the smoke happening, it means that your wok is not hot enough. It also means that since we're looking for that smoke, is that when you start wok cooking, a couple of things that you probably want to do is unplug your smoke detectors and open all of your windows. Otherwise, those smoke detectors are going to go off for sure. But as soon as we start seeing that smoke, we can add our cooking oil. So this is our peanut oil going in. About 4 tablespoons going in. And then we're going to do our long yao one more time. And the other thing that we can look for, if you're still not sure if that wok is hot enough yet, is take your wooden utensil. So this is a spoon. Probably more commonly you'll see Chinese chefs do this with chopsticks. And stick it in the oil. So if you look really closely, you can see the oil is starting to bubble up around the spoon. So that's generally a sign that your wok is very, very hot. If you don't see that oil bubbling up around the spoon, that means that your wok is not hot enough. So probably stop what you're doing and let it continue to heat up. Alright, let's start cooking. First up is the other half of our ginger and garlic, which we chopped up very, very first. And then we're just looking for some aromatic qualities about this stuff, so let it go until you start smelling ginger and garlic. That's usually about 10 seconds for me, but use your nose. When you smell ginger and garlic, you're ready to go. Need a little bit more oil too. Next up is our bok choy. Remember that bok choy is a very leafy veggie, so that makes it pretty tender and pretty delicate. So we're not looking for this stuff to be like completely pulverized or just like completely cooked in the way that you would if you were trying to like saute or like caramelize onions. We're just looking to cook off some rawness to those veggies. And then as soon as that rawness kind of cooks off, then we can add the rest of our ingredients. So that's kind of like the quality that you would generally associate with wok fried veggies, is that they're like a little bit crispy, almost raw but not quite raw, mostly just like crispy. So that happens from cooking those veggies on extremely high heat for an extremely short amount of time. So if I was doing like an Italian dish and I was cooking veggies, I would probably let these veggies go for at least 5 to 10 minutes. And definitely not do them with aromatic ingredients because they would burn. But in a wok fry, we're only going to go for like maybe a minute and a half. Definitely not more than 2 minutes because all we're really looking to do is kind of cook off some rawness, and then as soon as that the rawness sort of dissipates, then we can kind of add the rest of those ingredients and basically just pull it off the veg. And so what will essentially happen is that everything just gets cooked very, very briefly on very, very high heat. So it's still pretty crispy. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to add our meatballs back to the wok, followed by our braising sauce. And then what I like doing is adding a little bit of water here. What I meant to add earlier, but I forgot. This is it's going to be half a cup of stock, and that's going to give it a little bit more looseness for our braise to kind of have some time to braise. Alright, so you'll notice a couple of things just happened as soon as I added all of that liquid to the wok. The main thing that you'll notice is that if you listen really closely, the sizzling in the wok all dissipated, so there's not nearly as much sizzling as it was going on when we were flash cooking those veggies, which means that there's not nearly as much heat going on. So that loss of heat, if that ever happens while you're still cooking, it's a big, big problem. You never want to hear that happen while you're still cooking. But in this case, because we're very essentially all we're doing is letting things braise together. That's going to be just fine because there's nothing left to be cooked. Everything is already there. But if you still have things that are being cooked, that's a sign that you're on your way to a very mushy stir fry, which is never a good thing. All right. Last up, while that's braising, I'm going to throw together a very quick cornstarch slurry, which I should have done ahead of time, but I forgot. And a cornstarch slurry is exactly as the name implies. This is 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, which I'm combining with some water. What's most important about a cornstarch slurry is not actually the proportions of water, but really just that the cornstarch is dissolved. So we don't want large, solid chunks of cornstarch going on here because it could potentially clump up in the wok fry. Space Engine. Oh, have I tried cayenne pepper? I've never used cayenne pepper in Chinese food. It's definitely, that's not a thing that you find very often. I do use it in a lot of like Americanized Chinese recipes though. So I used it, most recently actually, I used it in a popcorn chicken recipe that's going to come out pretty soon. So it comes up like in a lot of dry rubs, really, really useful. But usually when I like want to add the kind of heat that you would find in cayenne pepper, usually what I end up using instead is Szechuan peppercorn, which is like not a similar kind of heat, but in a similar like realm of heat. And like probably more appropriate to like what traditional Chinese heat would taste like. But definitely like when I do like Americanized Chinese food, I use cayenne pepper quite a bit. Alright, so I'm adding my cornstarch slurry here, and what you'll notice is that as soon as we add that cornstarch, our sauce is going to go from pretty loose and liquidy to pretty thick and luxurious. So, and we now have this very, very thick sauce coming together thanks to that cornstarch. And that ought to do it. Yeah. Come on, there you go. Alright, so last up, what we want to do is clean that wok. I've said this at the end of pretty much every stream now. But always clean your wok while clean it while it's cold. Stuff will stick to it, and then you'll have to start scrubbing. So someone asked about wok care a little bit earlier too. But what we want to do, I don't have a camera over my but what we want to do is just rinse that wok down and then reheat it. So if you do that rinse while the wok is hot, you have a nice non-stick surface, so the same non-stick surface that you were cooking on. That non-stick surface is going to allow us to rinse everything off. So everything is just going to come right off while that wok is hot. If you let it cool, which is very, very tempting because there's food in front of us to eat, and we all want to eat this food. But very, very important is before you start digging into that food is clean that wok first, because if you don't clean it, everything is going to stick once the wok cools down, and then you're going to have stuff stuck to the wok, which puts you in this world of stuff that you don't ever want to be doing in a wok, like scrubbing and like breaking out sponges, all that stuff that you really don't want to be doing. So do yourself a favor, spend the last 45 seconds of your cook time just cleaning up the wok before you move on. Otherwise, you're going to have a hell of a time cleaning it later. So all I'm doing is I gave it a rinse, and then I'm wiping down some of that excess water. And you'll notice that as soon as I wiped it down, it's pretty much clean already. There's not a lot of stuff going on. And then I'm adding maybe half a teaspoon, maybe even a little bit less than half a teaspoon of oil here. And then, just like a cast iron pan, I'm going to coat that thing in oil on all sides. Including the bottom, and that's going to make sure that nothing starts rusting. And that's it. Your wok is ready to cook on again. So the next time you're ready to cook in your wok, you'll be ready to go. Could you sub red chili flake? Yeah, that would be. I do that all the time. Actually, again, I do that all the time in a lot of like Chinese Americanized Chinese recipes. I do that all the time. Where I use, I love using I find like, actually this is like something that I've discovered in a lot of like Panda Express recipes, is that where you would traditionally find the use of Szechuan peppercorn, I've found that they very, very frequently will be using red pepper flake, because I think that's like a more like American palate kind of heat that you would find in like a lot of American cuisine. So I think that's definitely like an Americanized thing that comes up in a lot of Chinese food, because red chili flake definitely that comes from Italian food, I believe. But yeah, to answer your question, I do that all the time. I use it in a lot of Panda Express stuff that I do. Where like I believe pretty sure the honey sesame chicken has red chili flake. I think the Kung Pao chicken has red chili flake. And then usually, very, very often, what I'll do when I do those like Chinese American hacks is I'll change that red chili flake out for some Szechuan peppercorn, and then I like to use them interchangeably depending on which palate I'm trying to replicate. So usually what I do, or the way that I've always eaten this, is in a big family style setting. So usually we eat it between a couple of people, which would go on the lazy Susan, and then you kind of like pick stuff off. Usually I like pick a couple meatballs off. Today I'm just eating by myself, so we can serve up a big bowl. Alright, let's check this out. So we take a look at the inside of our meatball first. It is very, very tender. Oh, super chewy. But definitely my favorite part is the braising sauce. That's like right on the money. Super, super savory. And just like packed with flavor, and it like complements that like the crispiness of the meatball really well. And like easily, my favorite part of a lion's head meatball is the sauce. Yeah, I also like, when I was a kid, used to eat this with spinach a lot, which I hated because I hated spinach when I was a kid. So I love the use of bok choy here because bok choy has a little bit more tenderness and like crispiness to it, so it's not like mushy in the way that cooked spinach is. But definitely a lion's head meatball, you could eat it with any kind of veggie that you want. You could throw some shiitake mushrooms in there, it would be great. You could probably do it with some carrots, that would be really great too. I bet a bell pepper would work really well. Onions, any kind of veggie that you've got will work. Hopefully, like, I would hope is if there's one thing that people take away from these streams is that in wok cooking, use what you have. Don't feel like you need to follow these recipes to a T. Use whatever you have and adapt to what's in your refrigerator. So. Very, very often I'll be following a recipe and then I'll forget to buy stuff, so I replace it with whatever I happen to have in the refrigerator, which in this case today, I didn't have enough pork, so I split it with some turkey. And I actually think it worked better than just using pure ground pork because it has like a little bit more chewiness to it. So yeah, cool. Is my name Wu? Yes, my name is Wesley Wu. That's my full name. That's where the name comes from. Yeah, I love how this one comes together too. That's the best part about wok cooking, is that it doesn't look like anything until it's done. Wok cooking kind of just looks like a big mess in the wok until you add the cornstarch slurry, it kind of just looks like a big watery, gloopy mess. And then when you add that cornstarch, it kind of just, everything just sort of tightens up. Kind of reminds me a lot of how like when you make a carbonara does not look like anything until you add the pasta water. Until you add the pasta water, carbonara really just like looks like undercooked eggs. That's what it looks like to me. And then when you start adding that pasta water, it sort of starts tightening up and like creating a really luxurious cream sauce. But before you add the pasta water, it really just looks like undercooked eggs. So. Charlie, I go by all of those. Yeah, you could call me Wes, Wesley, or Wu. You could call me Wu Can Cook. You could call me. I go by all of those. Totally. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If you're people have been asking about the music a lot. If you're looking for all the music, that all links over on a sister page, our sister YouTube channel, which is called Wu Cooks Beats, which I should probably start linking more. That's where all, if you've heard any music that comes up on a stream or in a video, that all lives over there. I actually have college degrees to talk about music and stuff, so I'm actually qualified to talk about that stuff. But I can also talk about cooking now, apparently, too. So if you're looking for the music, that's all over at Wu Cooks Beats. If you're looking for the recipes, that's all over on the YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/WuCanCook. Lots of fun recipes are coming up over there, including the recipe for this meatball dish. This came out, I think, back in October, or no, this is earlier this year, so I think February. No, I think later. I think it came out in January or so. That's always over on the YouTube channel. In those recipe videos, I tend to move a little bit slower. We kind of talk about some of the decision making that goes behind recipes and like why I do certain things in recipes. So I talked a little bit about, in this particular recipe, in that recipe video, I talked a little bit about why I use panko breadcrumb instead of cornstarch. And a couple other things. Very often I'll talk a little bit about like how I know these dishes and like where from my childhood they come from. So stuff like that, it's always really interesting to talk about. If you're looking for content like that, definitely hop over and check what's going on over there. That's also where the schedule of things coming up for the live stream lives. So if you're trying to find out what I'm going to be cooking next, that's a good place to start. I actually don't know everything that I'm going to be cooking next because I forget what's on that schedule. So, but definitely coming up tomorrow is Japanese white miso curry, which is one of my favorite curries of all time. So that's going to come up tomorrow. Where we used a little bit of white miso paste to kind of build out this really, really rich curry umami flavor for that curry. And it's one of my favorites for sure. What else? Yeah, if you haven't checked it out yet, there's also a really fun series going on where we've been reproducing a lot of food from Chinese American cuisine, which someone was asking about Panda Express earlier. And actually someone else was asking about red chili flakes, which is actually the reason why I know about so many different subs from Chinese American cuisine. Is because I've reproduced a lot of Chinese American classics, so things like Panda Express's General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, stuff like that. Stuff that's really, really Americanized Chinese food. And I've kind of reproduced some of those things and taken a look at what those dishes would look like if they are not Americanized. So kind of taking some of those American qualities out and taking a look at what those things look like without Americanized qualities. So lots of fun stuff like that going on over on YouTube. So if you haven't hopped over to YouTube yet, check out what's going on over there. We're working our way to 2,700 subscribers by the end of March. So if you want to help us hit that subscriber goal, lots of fun stuff going on, go over and subscribe. Oh yeah, the last thing that I'll mention, I very rarely ask for money on the YouTube streams, but today a buddy of mine, his name is Brent. If you've ever popped over on the YouTube channel in the chat, Brent pops up on that channel quite a bit. His name, I think his YouTube channel name is Drums415, something like that. Brent has a buddy that has a child that's in the hospital right now. With I think it's a rare brain tumor, and they're raising some money to pay for some hospital bills. So we're raising some money right now. If you have the means to do it, feel free to contribute. You can either contribute to the Gofundme link, which would go straight to those affected, or you can contribute to my Streamlabs link, which I'm just going to send straight to that Gofundme link. So either would work. The Streamlabs link is streamlabs.com/WuCanCook, which goes to my PayPal. Or the GoFundMe link is in the the YouTube channel comments. So either of those would work. If you have the means to do so, please consider contributing. They need some help. I know that I saw that they're trying to raise 25 grand for some medical bills, and they're not even. I think they're like 15 grand off right now, so that's quite a bit short. So. Thank you all for tuning in. Stick around, hop over to YouTube and check out what's going on over there and subscribe. We have a new recipe for white miso Japanese curry coming up. That's coming tomorrow. And then we'll be cooking through that recipe on Mondays, actually. So white miso, the recipe's coming out on Friday, and then the stream for that is coming out on Monday. So if you have any questions, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I'll be around doing some dishes and stuff, but I can hopefully still answer stuff. So. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next week. Bye.
Start up a conversation with just me, and trust me, I'll give it a chance. So now take my hand, stop, and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. And now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Well, come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. Last night you were in my room. Now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you. When we can, we let the story begin. We're going out on our first date. Well, you and me are thrifty, so go all you can eat. Fill up your bag and I fill up your plate. We talk for hours and hours about the sweet and the sour and how your family's doing okay. And leaving, getting a taxi, kissing the backseat, tell the driver make the radio play. And I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. Push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. Last night you were in my room. Now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you. Come on, be my baby. Come on, 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 come on, be my baby. Come on.